My name is Jason Pace. I'm a Spend Visibility consultant here at SpendHQ. Joining me are several members of our team today, as well as two guest speakers that I'm about to introduce. SpendHQ is a bunch of people who are fanatical about building great tools for procurement leaders. We believe Spend Visibility is job one. We believe that you can't save what you can't see. Our mission is to support and promote the strategic role of procurement, and through our solution, build a community of people who believe what we believe. You are now a part of that community. But we're not going to talk about Spend Visibility today, because Spend Visibility is not your biggest challenge. We're going to talk about something even more important. We have a lot of procurement leaders here on this call. We have a lot of future procurement leaders on this call. And while I don't know all of you personally, I know something about you. I know that you want people to listen and pay attention to what you're doing. I know that credibility and influence are important. I know that a major part of your job is really not procurement, and I know that it's a huge struggle. And the reason why I know this is that I have conversations with people just like you every day, and I go to conferences like ProcureCon, and mostly I just listen, and what I hear is that it doesn't matter how good the numbers look or how logical our business case is. People are still buying off contract, marketing still doesn't want you playing in their sandbox, and IT says, hey, we got it. And they're all missing out on a huge opportunity, aren't they? And so is your company. They're missing procurement's expertise and value. They are taking unnecessary risks, and they're missing out on savings. But we're doing all the right things, aren't we? We're putting great business cases in front of people. We've got charts and graphs. We can kill them with logic. We've got a lot to say, but we're not communicating. And the reason why is that we need to communicate more effectively in a different way. So one day it just hit me. Instead of having an hour-long commercial for SpendHQ, let's pull back the covers a little bit and share what we've learned and are continuing to learn about not just how to communicate, but how to sell the idea that procurement is strategic and it's critical. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why is a Spend Visibility guy telling me this? Well, let me tell you why I'm so lucky. We do have a great solution here at SpendHQ, but we also have a secret weapon. Just down the hall from me, there's an army of about 60 consultants that together know everything there is to know about procurement. They are the people that make up Insight Sourcing Group, and they are great at selling the strategic value of procurement, or they wouldn't be in business. And so when I come across someone out there with a specific need or a question, I can go ask one of these people, and they always have an answer. I'm also lucky that I have great partners that help us communicate our value to people like you. And I have two of those people with me here today. Our first speaker today is Kirk Poucher from Insight Sourcing Group. In the last 7 years, Kirk has worked with over 100 procurement leaders, like you, on more than 500 separate sourcing projects. Kirk is an expert at strategic sourcing and procurement process design, and his most recent procurement project was a handsome baby boy, James Andrew, who is 6.5 months old today. After Kirk, we'll have David Kirchen, and I'll tell you a funny story about David. I was sitting in a seminar in Atlanta just this week, and I noticed something about the presentation, and so I texted David with a picture and said, hey, this presentation has your fingerprints all over it. Do you know this guy? And sure enough, it was one of David's clients. David is a messaging expert and coach, a stunt double for Bruce Willis, and more importantly, a new grandfather in April to a new baby girl. Folks, today is just part one in a 3-part series. We're going to be here for about 45 minutes. We'll have 2 speakers, and then we'll get to a short Q&A session. You can ask your questions by typing them into the GoToWebinar control panel. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kurt. Take us out to the ballgame, Kurt.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jason. And to your point, this topic was drawn directly from my experiences leading consulting engagements in procurement and strategic sourcing. Over time, I've seen countless examples of great procurement teams do just really outstanding work, only to see their recommendations die on the vine because they didn't have the proper level of executive support or stakeholder buy-in. So the question we wanted to answer was, what really separates those organizations that can complete the cycle and fully realize the benefits of strategic sourcing from those who may execute effectively but not see the same level of success? Our hypothesis is that the real issue is not a result of poor execution, but rather a low emphasis on treating your internal customers like your paying customers. By not speaking their language or truly understanding their needs and motivations, we often miss the opportunity to truly deliver meaning, savings, and value to our organization. To get us started today, I wanted to talk through a few numbers which paint an interesting picture for procurement professionals. 76, 34, 60. From a recent survey of top procurement leaders, 76% indicated that their top priority for 2014 was to expand procurement influence within the organization. What I found interesting about this is people always expect procurement groups to focus on just driving savings, but clearly the folks leading these organizations are more focused on driving value across the business. An Aberdeen survey indicated financial managers estimate on average only 34% of procurement savings is actually getting booked to the bottom line. This is dramatically lower than the 75 or 80% rate, which is being reported by sourcing managers. This disparity clearly shows a significant gap between what procurement thinks it's actually delivering and what the rest of the organization is truly seeing. And finally, SpendMatters research indicates that 60% of buying organizations admitted they're not fully able to realize the savings identified from sourcing initiatives due to implementation bottlenecks. What this means is that there's really a disconnect between procurement efforts and bottom line results. While top procurement leaders are looking to gain ground, impact larger pieces of the business, they're meeting resistance from functional leaders who aren't seeing the results that procurement's promising. Not convinced yet? Well, we'll dig a little bit deeper into the underlying issues. As procurement professionals, our charge is typically to help business leaders get the same or better quality at a lower price point, or help the organization evaluate the potential cost impact of a fundamental shift in strategy, say to answer some of the what-if questions around insourcing or outsourcing, make versus buy. We obviously all want to do our best to create value within the organization. However, consider this. Procurement typically influences less than 60% of spend across both direct and indirect categories. 31% of procurement professionals admitted that they're not involved in make versus buy decisions at all. A recent KPMG study found that only 17% of procurement functions lead demand management activities, and 29% do not participate in these activities at all. And finally, SpendMatters estimates that 30% of your hard-earned savings never even gets implemented. Now, as we think about some of the challenges that we face, we find a couple of kind of common themes that pull out of the conversations that we've heard from our clients. Some of these common objections echo the numbers that we saw in the previous page, but for example, many clients indicate that the procurement savings projections are either not really grounded in any analysis or supporting detail, or they're just not perceived as realistic. A lot of the comments we hear are, well, you know, they're swag estimates, they're just kind of projections, and they can really lead to some unrealistic expectations and don't really account for what we see in the market. As we've heard from client leaders multiple times when they're evaluating procurement proposals, I generally take about half the savings, double the timeline. You know, if it still makes sense, then we'll talk about it. Similarly, a lot of times these savings projections don't account for some of the hard and soft costs of actually switching suppliers or changing contracts. Supplier testing and qualification, customer spec approval, getting rid of your existing inventory. All these things are examples of costs that are typically not factored into that savings projection, but will truly impact the business in a negative way. And then finally, CFOs may not even see these projected savings hit the income statement. Say, for instance, your company purchased a piece of equipment last year for $1 million. This year, you negotiate the price of another similar machine for $900,000. Most procurement professionals would consider that to be $100,000 savings that you're booking in the current year. However, your CFO may only see 1/10 or less of that savings hit the bottom line, depending on how your depreciation expense is handled. These common objections and the diminishing returns that kind of come from it lead to what I'll call the credibility death spiral, for lack of a better term. So first, what happens is these types of objections and challenges that we've seen lead to your procurement recommendations not being implemented or fully realized. Secondly, procurement then loses credibility within the business because we didn't deliver on our promises. Third, our future resources are not approved or allocated because we're not delivering on our processes, and that then further reinforces and limits our ability to create value within the organization. The real takeaway here is, from our experience, the biggest challenges are not created from poor project execution, but are really driven by a lack of effective communication and persuasion within the organization. The underlying issue that we see is it's not that your business case is wrong, not that your analysis is wrong, or not even that the numbers aren't meaningful. The issue we find is, as procurement professionals, we're not typically good salespeople. Now, the concept of selling within a procurement organization may be somewhat counterintuitive, but if you'll bear with me for a moment, I think I can convince you. You may have heard the phrase, build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. This is basically implying that buyers will tend to make decisions based only on facts and logic, and will buy whichever product has the best features, the highest performance, and in a vacuum that may be true. However, I think what you'll see is in the U.S. alone, companies are spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year on marketing, betting that buyers are making decisions based on just, a little bit more than quantitative and measurable facts. Generally speaking, procurement folks are very analytical, left-brain thinkers. From our point of view, building that compelling business case is all about just getting the numbers right. Our savings will sell itself is kind of a common point of view when we're pitching these types of recommendations. Why wouldn't our marketing group want us to come in and save them 5 or 10%, which we believe is out there? If we extend our kind of mousetrap example to procurement, you can have a solid business case on paper, do all the legwork to manage a great project, and still not be able to persuade your organization to move forward with a recommendation. This is because business leaders don't always make decisions based just on data and facts and logic. Humans make decisions based on a variety of emotions. For example, greed, right? If I make a good decision in this project, I'll be rewarded either financially or through visibility within the organization. On the other hand, fear. If I make a bad decision, it's going to blow up in my face. How is that going to be viewed on kind of my permanent record within the organization? You got to be able to communicate your value in terms of desired outcomes. Paint a picture of the future state which creates a clear contrast between the path that we are recommending and the consequences of some of those suboptimal choices or even the status quo. For example, pitch the return on investment for your marketing sourcing project in terms of the ability to increase customer impressions or procure an additional media buy that you can do with the savings that your project can drive. Speak with your CFO in terms of the earnings per share impact of your procurement transformation efforts. Now, I know all that sounds great. How do I do that, right? How do we actually paint this compelling picture, speak to our business stakeholders in a way that shows value and meaning and understanding of their wants and needs? I'm going to leave it to David to really get into the nuts and bolts of how we create that effective pitch, but for now I'll leave you with kind of a final image of what the future state could look like. First of all, if my top priority is to expand procurement influence within the organization, we have to move away from transactional communications that are solely cost-focused and instead engage our business stakeholders in conversations about how procurement can strategically add value to the business. Treat your stakeholder discussions like a sales meeting. Ask great questions. Put yourself in their shoes. Understand what motivates and challenges them on a daily basis, and what are the implications of these challenges in the broader business context. This will allow you to build that business case in a way that speaks their language and better aligns with their goals. Once you've built that business case, executed and persuaded your stakeholders to move forward, you can get clear wins on the scoreboard to help you gain broader visibility and support for procurement initiatives. When you create more satisfied customers within the organization and position procurement leaders as enablers that can drive value across the organization. Finally, with that, I'll turn it over to David for more details on some of the how and why behind the concept, and then we'll get back together at the end to work through some specific examples.
Thanks, Kirk. It's a privilege to be here today, and I can empathize with those of you that are listening today. The world that we live in, we've never been inundated with as much information as we are today. With the advent of the internet, there's just volumes and reams of information. Watch people walk around on planet Earth. You'll see them sticking their face in their iPhones and their smartphones and their tablets. And so we've got all of this information that we're inundated with. So how is it that you can communicate and cut through that noise so that your internal clients can understand the value of what it is that you're recommending? Well, there's some very key principles and techniques that go into that. And I've had the privilege of working with large corporations, small companies, working with HR professionals, IT professionals, and sales professionals. And the principles and techniques that you're about to experience are of value anytime that you have something important to communicate. And if you're not going to take my word for it, then I'll actually rely on these numbers here because they tell a pretty compelling story. And the numbers are 9,057, 40, and then the word success. And actually, this is a story that's been told by a very famous author, recent author by the name of Daniel Pink. And his latest best-selling book is To Sell is Human. And the story of those numbers, he surveyed over 9,057 business professionals. Now, these are professionals that are not paid to sell on a day-to-day basis, professions that run the gamut. And in that survey, he asked them to keep track of the amount of time that they spent on specific activities during the course of the day. And what they found is that 40% of the time spent every day was spent trying to influence or persuade somebody in their business world. And the other thing that came out of that is, as he was talking to all these different business professionals, not only do they spend a large amount of time trying to persuade, but they picked the ability to do that as the key ingredient for success in their world. So I experienced how this plays out in a negative way when I was managing a sales organization selling digital X-ray technology to the dental practice. And so just very quickly, I was in Orlando, I was doing a trade show, and we were demonstrating the technology. It was back in the day when digital X-ray was fairly new, and had a dentist walk up to the booth, owner of one of the larger dental practices in Orlando, engaged him in a great conversation, told him the resolution of the sensors that we sold, told him how much better the software that we were providing, ran on a better platform, more universal, gave him all the key elements and benefits of the technology. And then we got towards the end of the conversation, and I said, hey, I've got an ROI calculator, and I'd like to take some of the information from your practice and plug it into this ROI calculator. And so I proceeded to ask questions around number of patients and number of x-rays, plugged it into the ROI calculator, and before I hit the magic enter button, I asked him, do you agree with the premise of this spreadsheet and the questions and the dialogue that we've had? He answered, yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, you're probably being too conservative in some of the premises. And I said, great, rather be more conservative. So hit the magic button. It showed a 4-month payback. And after the 4-month payback, every year he'd be putting about another $80,000 to his bottom line. So I asked him, I said, now do you agree with these numbers in the corresponding savings? And he goes, yeah, that all makes perfect sense. So I'm thinking at that point, great, he's on board. So would you like to purchase this digital X-ray system on credit, or would you rather finance it? And he was like, no, I'm not ready to buy. And I'm slapping my head, just completely dumbfounded, because I made the most logical case any person could make for him purchasing that technology. And yet he still looked at me and said, no, I'm not going to buy. So I did something that most salespeople would never, ever do. I looked at him and I said, okay, I'm going to make this statement. I want you to know that it's absolutely true. I said, you're never going to be a customer of mine. And he looked at me and he's like, why? And I said, because I'm going to ask you a question now, and I don't want you to think I'm still trying to sell you. So let's go ahead and settle it. You're never going to be a customer of mine. And he was like, okay. And I said, so the question is this: why aren't you ready to buy? And he said, I'm just not. And the reason for that is because as human beings, and there have been a number of neurologists that have proved this over the last 10 years, as human beings, we make decisions based on meaning and emotion and justify it with logic and reason. And there was no meaning and emotion in that conversation for the dentist to make a decision around this technology. So let's take a closer look at how this plays out and some of the challenges that showed up even in the conversation that I had with this dentist. And these are the 3 deadly sins of a compelling selling conversation. The first deadly sin is way too much information. And so anytime that there's a volume of information that shows up in a conversation, it makes it very difficult for an individual to decide. The second deadly sin would be not presenting from the buyer's point of view. You know, in any conversation where you're trying to persuade somebody to understand or to adopt your worldview or adopt your recommendation, in any conversation like that, the most important person in that conversation is the one sitting across the table from you. And so we make the mistake of constructing the conversation in a way where it's I and we, and we're talking about everything that we know about the recommendation or the proposal or the product or service that we provide. The third mistake is in not holding out something unique in the recommendation that you're making. Again, I was referring at the opening to the challenge that we have with all this information that we have at our fingertips in the world that we live in. And one of the most difficult things is trying to determine, how is this different? How is the recommendation that you're holding out to an internal client, how is it unique or different, and why does it matter to them? So those are the three common mistakes that you need to try and stay away from as you're building a compelling conversation around your recommendation. So how do you change this conversation? Well, first, let's take a look at how it starts. So you may walk into a conference room or an office to have a conversation with an internal client. You're fully prepared to make a recommendation. You've got all the facts and information at your fingertips. And at the end of this conversation, one of three things is going to happen. They're going to decide to accept your recommendation and choose you. They'll choose not you. And then more and more in today's world, it's actually a dynamic where there's this no decision, or they decide to stay with the status quo. And so during this conversation cycle, you're sharing a lot of facts and information. You know, here's the hard, cold facts, here's the data, here's the corresponding save, spend, contract terms, and it's mostly factual and logical in content. And again, the challenge with that showed up in the conversation that I had with the dentist, and that is facts and logic and reason do not win the day when you're offering an opportunity for your internal client to make a decision for you. So what if you could do this instead? What if you could back the conversation up and introduce a challenge or frame the conversation around a business driver or a business objective? And then what if you could tie your unique capability, the thing that's unique about the recommendation, what if you could tie that uniqueness to the ability to either realize that objective or that business driver, or to overcome the challenge that you've introduced in the conversation? What if you could then communicate with them in a way where you're talking about what they can do differently in their world as a result of using this recommendation? And then lastly, what if you could attach some meaning to it? What if you could communicate in a way where they understand the relevance and meaning in their world specific to the recommendation that you're putting in front of them? What this does is it elevates the conversation above facts and information and makes it more about meaning and emotion. And there is a specific success formula in doing that, we'll talk about in just a second. But by elevating the conversation to meaning and emotion, it makes it easier for them to not stay with the status quo and actually agree to the recommendation that you're putting in front of them. So a quick biology lesson, because everything that you've heard up to this point is based on the way that the human brain operates. It's based on the way that we as human beings make decisions every day. And so to understand this decision-making process and why these different principles that you're hearing about today are so important in the conversations that you're having, it's important to understand the role of the three different parts of the brain. So the green part of the brain that you see there is the reptilian brain, old brain, brainstem. For our purposes today, we're going to refer to it as the old brain. The old brain is the part of your brain that's responsible for survival. It is the fight or flight part of our instincts. And so the old brain is the ultimate decision maker when it comes to making a decision. And you know, in the sales world, we've heard over and over again, you got to get to the ultimate decision maker in any business conversation. So recognize that when you're sitting in front of one of your internal clients, the ultimate decision maker for that individual is their old brain. Now, sitting right above the old brain is the limbic brain, and the limbic brain is where the seat of emotions reside. That's where we experience pain and fear and love and joy and all the different range of emotions that we can experience as human beings. And then the last, or the largest part of the brain on the outside, that big wrinkly part that you can see, is the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex is where we process logic, reason, information, and they've proved, the neuroscience have proved that the way that we receive information and the way that we process information from our five senses actually goes to the old brain first, then the limbic brain, then the cerebral cortex. So literally, we're processing information from our five senses from the inside out, from the old brain first. And that's why the way that you communicate with your internal clients, that conversation needs to be constructed in a way that the old brain can understand, comprehend, and make a quick decision around. And there's specific elements that have to show up in order for this language of decision for the old brain to take place. And it's called the success formula. So the first element is that it needs to be really simple. Everything that you're sharing needs to be condensed down into a very succinct message. Because in the volume of information, we talked about this earlier, it's very difficult for the old brain to make a snap decision. The second element is that there needs to be something unexpected to show up in the conversation. Unexpected is critical anytime that you're going to have a conversation that's going to last more than 10 minutes. John Medina, in a book called The Brain Principles, identified that after 10 minutes, the old brain literally goes to sleep and stops paying attention to what's being said, and you have to introduce something unexpected to wake it up and to get it to re-engage around a new topic or a new concept or a new part of the conversation that you're sharing. So something unexpected has to happen in this conversation. The third element is concrete. We have the habit of speaking in very abstract terms. And abstract terms or words are confusing to the old brain because the old brain's sitting there trying to figure out, what do you mean by that? So if I say the word justice, then there's probably 50 different interpretations of what does he mean by justice? Does he mean justice of the peace? Does he mean justice versus mercy? But if I said the word elephant, elephant is very concrete. Everybody has the same mental image of what an elephant is. So guard yourself as you're communicating and using words that are abstract and stick to words that are very concrete. And the way that you can tell if you're not doing that well is if whoever you're having the conversation with looks at you and says, what does that mean? Or what do you mean by that? That's a clue that you have not been speaking in ways that are very concrete. This is probably one of the most important elements to show up in a conversation where you're trying to convey value. And literally what you could do is put an equal mark next to contrast and write out contrast equals value. Because the way that the old brain perceives value is it's constantly looking at its current state, all the challenges and all the pain associated with that, and it's comparing it to this future state that you're holding out or that the old brain is receiving in a conversation. So literally that side-by-side comparison of this is my world without the recommendation, this is my world with the recommendation, it's that side-by-side comparison that allows the old brain to determine how much value is showing up in this conversation. So it's up to you to create that contrasting world and that contrasting picture. The fifth element is emotion. There needs to be an element of emotion to show up in this conversation. And this is the next formula in the success solution, and that is emotion equals memory. If I were to ask everybody that's listening to the sound of my voice, where were you on 9/11? I can pretty much guarantee that 100% of you could describe to me in detail where you were and what you were doing at the moment that those planes were crashing into the buildings. Yet if I asked you what you had for lunch 2.5 weeks ago, I'd probably get a lot of blank stares. And the reason for that is that when we experience a strong emotion as a human being, our brain releases hormones that cement the memory in detail of what's going on in our life at that moment in a way that we can recall vividly years and decades later. So it's up to you to provide some emotion in this conversation that you're having to create memory so that when you walk out of the office after making that recommendation, they can still remember a day, a week, or a month later the conversation that you just had. The next element is sight. So when you look at our five senses, the most dominant sense that our old brain relies on for survival is sight. It's always going to be sight. If I were to drop a bunch of you in the jungles of India where there's Bengal tigers and I said you get to keep one of your five senses, you're going to tell me sight. And so it's on you to create a conversation, but also to provide some visual support of that conversation to make it easier for your internal client to make a decision. And then the last element, again, a very essential element, and it's the use of stories. As human beings, we live in stories. It's one of the reasons why we love going to the movies. is because we experience everything that's going on the screen just as though we were in the movie itself. And so in the conversations that you're having with your internal clients, you can actually build stories around very important points about their world to make it easy for them to remember those most important points and to remember the conversation that you've had. You know, I love this YouTube video that I found, and it's about a blind man sitting in a park. And you can see him there with his tin can next to him, and it starts out in the video, he's got a sign that just says, "I'm blind, please help." And as the video goes on, you can see people are walking by, and they're dropping money on his mat, and this is happening, you know, just a little bit. It's not like there's an overwhelming response to his condition. Well, up walks a woman, and she picks up the sign, and she starts to scribble something on the side. And she sets the sign back down, and the next thing that you see in the video is literally every person that's walking by is dropping money on his mat. And you can watch the expression on his face as he's kind of shocked and perplexed and puzzled. Why is this happening? Why are everybody walking by and putting money on my mat? Well, a little later in the video, the woman returns back to the blind man, and he reaches out, touches her feet, and could tell that it's the same woman that came and changed the sign earlier. And he looks up at her and he asks this very important question. "What did you do to my sign?" And she answered the same words, but better. And the words were, "It's a beautiful day, and I can't see it." And so what's happened here is the first sign that you see, "I'm blind, please help," is a statement of fact. The second sign, just by changing the words, is a statement of meaning. It allows every person that walks by to experience what it means to be blind, what it means to be this blind man, and that is that it's beautiful outside and he can't see it. And so you have the same opportunity as you're communicating with your internal clients to communicate around meaning and emotion and not so much about logic and reason. And it's not that the logic and reason isn't important, but it's the thing that we rely on second when we're making our decisions. And so what I'd like to do now is bring Kurt back onto the line here with us, and we're just going to have a quick dialogue to cover 4 specific steps that you all can take to change the conversation, change the way that you're speaking to internal clients. So Kirk, I'd like to ask you just real quickly, in your experience over the last couple of months, give me an example of a company that was relying on their procurement department or professional to make a recommendation that was going to impact a specific area of their business. Give me an example of that, and then we'll walk through these 4 steps.
Yeah, sure. So, for example, there's a greeting card company that we worked with based here in the U.S., has clients all over the world. We were engaged to help support the sourcing of their paper stock, one of their kind of key direct input materials. In addition to your typical cost-saving pressures, one of their COO's primary objectives was also to shorten the lead times of their finished product and getting it out to their customers.
Okay. So if you've got a pen and paper in front of you and you really do want to change the way that you are communicating with your internal clients, I want you to write down these 4 steps. So the first step, and we'll apply it to the example that Kirk just gave us, the first step is to identify a business objective or a business driver for the internal client that you're making a recommendation to. The second step is to identify a challenge or a problem that's keeping them from realizing that business driver or objective. The third step is look into the recommendation that you're getting ready to make and identify something unique about that recommendation that helps them overcome the challenge or problem that you just identified. And then the fourth step, create a statement of what they can do differently as a result of adopting the recommendation that you're making, something dramatic, something impactful that they can do differently in their business, in their world, in their department. And so we'll do that. So you've got those 4 written down, and we're going to do that for this particular example. So from what I heard you say is the business driver would be to increase customer satisfaction.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So give us a recap again. So what's the challenge? What's keeping them from doing that?
Sure. So the challenge they're facing as it relates to customer satisfaction is one of their incumbent suppliers on this paper stock side had some manufacturing constraints in that they only had 3 plants which produced a specific product that our client needed. Since our client has facilities all over the country, there were some significant challenges around the inbound lead times, the extra inventory they had to carry, and so that obviously kind of translated throughout their manufacturing process.
Okay. So unique. What was unique in the recommendation that you were getting ready to make?
Sure. So through our sourcing process, we identified a new supplier which had 25 or so locations around the country which could produce the same product that our client was looking for. And even though the proposed unit price was slightly higher than what they were currently paying, the kind of total program cost was actually a lot lower due to the reduced transportation costs, the lower inventory holding costs that they incurred from having kind of these distributed supply locations. So most importantly, since they had these plants all over the country, we were able to reduce the inbound lead times by about 3 days, which again met that COO's need to increase customer satisfaction by getting them their product faster.
Okay. So you answered the fourth part of that equation in what you just said, and that is, what's the most impactful thing that they could do differently? So give that to me again. If you're sitting in front of the COO and you said, hey, through this recommendation you can, how would you complete that sentence?
Sure. So, what if through implementing a new supplier, you could, significantly increase your customer satisfaction by reducing your product lead times and, potentially drive that through increased market share, bringing in new customers top line, all because we're implementing a new solution that's a little bit different than what you're doing today.
Right. So by going through those 4 specific steps, what you all have the opportunity to do is to create the theme for the story. This isn't the entire story, it's not the rest of the story, but it can become the theme. And again, the model for that would be to say, hey, Mr. COO, I understand your objective is increase customer satisfaction. Understand that you're challenged in that your current process or your current provider is limiting your ability to deliver products and services in a timely fashion. What if you could compress that time while reducing cost, increase customer satisfaction, market share? You can through this specific recommendation. So those become the baseline or the storyline for the conversation. And if we have time, may be able to talk about how to expand that a little bit further. So in summary, 3 things to remember. Frame the conversation around a business driver. Number 2, create a statement of what they can do different with the unique aspect of your proposal. And then number 3, describe how their world will be better as a result of adopting this recommendation. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jason.
Wow. So I can hear the applause across the internet right now. Thank you, guys. This has been fantastic. I don't know about some of you out there, but when I hear this message, I think 2 things. Part of me cringes just a little about all the missed opportunities that I had to bring meaning into a conversation and bring emotion into it, because I was just pounding people with facts and features and, hey, check out this graphic and look at, instead of saying things like, this is what this could mean to you, right? And so I think that's great. But the other feeling I have is that how exciting it's going to be to have the next conversation where I know I can bring a little bit of this into it. And so we're going to take some questions. And I guess there's a couple out there. First of all, this notion of, David, of you talked about emotion, right? And so it's kind of a little weird because, we're in business. We're not, we're not sitting on the couch here listening to, our therapist. We're trying to. You talk about bringing emotion into this. Can you unpack that just a little bit more about what that means to those of us who are in business and kind of just interacting in that way every day?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and I do understand that, and I've had audiences looking at me going, like, so you want us to make our internal clients or our customers cry? And I laugh at that because that's only one of a full range of emotions that we experience as human beings. So let me focus on this. One of the most dominant emotions that we experience as human beings is around pain. And so there's an opportunity for your internal client to actually feel the pain of the situation that they're in. And one of the best ways that you can uncover that and let them live in that pain is to ask the question, what does that mean? So if they're telling you, hey, due to our current processes and systems, we're losing customers, and it's because of this, you can ask the question, so what does that mean? And then let them extrapolate the consequences of the current situation that they're in. But you can also ask the question, what does that mean to you? And then what does that mean to your organization? And as they're answering the question, as they're giving voice to it, they're literally going to be experiencing the pain associated with their current state. And that's just one way that you can introduce emotion into the conversation.
Very good. Well, thank you. And do you guys get the sense that you're like becoming Jedis now? I mean, this is kind of some really good, deep stuff. And I hope that for those of you that are out there right now that are thinking about this and you're thinking, okay, how am I going to translate this into the next step? Think in terms of the next presentation you're going to be making, whether you're going to be talking to an executive C-level person or whether you're going to be going to one of your stakeholders. And it's going to be different this time. I can tell right now, because instead of going with your presentation deck and all of your spreadsheets, I mean, you're going to have to take that stuff with you, right? But think about it and thinking about that in terms of like what that's going to mean to them, what the payoff is going to be, and in terms of the business. But I think the other thing is it's not just a payoff about the business, is it? It's a little bit about the payoff for everyone in a personal way. So when you're talking to people about what it means to them, get them to also, I think you've taught me also, is just get them to talk about and articulate what it would mean to them personally. And so that's really exciting. So Kirk, we have another question. I think there's a lot of folks that are getting this from a standpoint of making presentations and really making a strong presentation or an argument to a stakeholder. I think that's really getting a lot of traction. But talk to us a little bit about what this means from a day-to-day standpoint, from a practical standpoint, just when we're just coming in and doing our jobs every day.
Yeah, so I think it starts at the very beginning when you're kind of looking to tee up a new project. As you are identifying opportunities and doing your stakeholder interviews, obviously by remembering to focus specifically on their needs and challenges, put yourself in their shoes, as we talked about, ask those compelling questions and ask why and what it means, and not just focus on the results that you think you could deliver or case studies of how you've worked with other parts of the business. As you're working through, make sure you're hitting on their key issues and concerns, make it clear you understand the pain points. As you're working through your sourcing exercise, you can use that information to prioritize your business requirements. You can use it to prioritize which suppliers are included in a sourcing exercise. Want to make sure we tie your recommendations and key takeaways to, circle back to their pain points and the challenges they identified, and show how your project kind of can uniquely meet their needs and solve that problem. And again, with the recommendation, let's make sure we can show the contrast between your recommendations, what our version of the future state looks like compared to the status quo, right? And how our version is better. It's an easy kind of side-by-side comparison.
Very good, very good. Folks, you can type your questions into the little control panel there on GoToMeeting. We've got a few more minutes that we can spend, and while we're waiting for more questions, I want to make a commitment to you guys. We talked about this community in the beginning, and one of the things I just want to commit to you is that I did mention that we have additional webinars coming up, and what I want to commit to you is that when we end today, if you have any questions, if you have any specifics that you'd like to discuss, we can actually have a separate format of a Q&A and maybe bring some of that focus that comes out of this into our next webinar. And so we've got our contact information up here. And you can reach me at the SpendHQ address there, and of course, Kirk is at insightsourcing.com. And then one of the things that I've done with David in the past when I've had a big presentation come up is that I've actually hired David to take a look at what I've produced and get some coaching on that. So I know all of us have those moments every year where we have the big presentation and a lot is riding on it, a lot is at stake for us personally and for the company. And so if you ever feel like you need a gut check on that, I've used David in the past to be a great resource around that, and we will definitely bring him back again. So I guess as a final wrap up. What I want to ask is, we put this presentation together with David's help. And in fact, a lot of the way we communicate now is more focused on meaning. So I wanted to see if we could maybe call out just a few things in the presentation today, either David or Kirk, that were different than maybe you would have done it if you hadn't had knowledge of these techniques. So Kirk, I'll ask David first, actually, and then we'll wrap up because we're reaching time here. So Kirk, David, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so hopefully it has been a different experience for those of you that have been on the webinar. You've noticed some things different in what was showing up on the screen and in the way that the content was put together. So one of the things that went into the construction of the webinar is that it followed the same pattern that I walked you through in the example that Kirk and I were just discussing a few minutes ago. We started off with the thing that you're trying to accomplish, and that's, again, a more influential, impactful role within the organization. We talked about the challenges that you're facing. We held out to you some things that you could do differently, and then we walked you through some examples of how that would work. So that's a wonderful way to construct any conversation, because the first part of that conversation is going to be completely about the individual that you're speaking to, the person that they care most about, and that's them. The other thing that you probably notice from a visual standpoint is that PowerPoint is a wonderful tool, but it gets abused a lot. And the way that it gets abused is, and probably the biggest sin that gets made in the use of PowerPoint, are just too many words up on a slide. I mean, how many of you have sat through a PowerPoint presentation where the presenter or speaker is literally reading the words up on the wall? That's never been the intent of PowerPoint. The intent is for it to support the conversation that you're having with your internal client. And the best way that you can use PowerPoint is, and one of the best examples I can think of in recent history is Steve Jobs. If you look at some of the keynote speeches that he gave for Apple, you'd notice behind him there would be large images, pictures of an individual, pictures of faces, pictures of emotion, maybe a large pie chart. One or two words would show up on a slide. And so those are some of the techniques that you can adopt as you're presenting to your internal clients. Please, please, please stay away from just words on a wall and words on a screen, and use PowerPoint in a way that's creative and in a way that supports this conversation that ultimately is about the internal client that you're having that conversation with. So Kurt, were there any things that showed up different for you?
No, I think I'd echo what you're saying here. The other thing I would bring to the table is, obviously, given the format, we didn't have the opportunity to really go out and have a conversation with all of our participants first and really dig down a little bit further into what some of these challenges have meant to them personally. But obviously, in a business setting, in the real world, what we would want to do is to have that context so that when we're going into the conversation, we have some personal experience that we can relate to. Hey, I know how this has impacted your career and you personally, and then relate our solution back to that specific circumstance.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you guys. Thank you, David. Thank you, Kirk. I appreciate the team that's supported this webinar. And most of all, I appreciate everybody out there that's listened in. Please take advantage of the contact information we have here. We would love to hear your feedback about what you would like to hear next. Like I said, we've got several professionals here we can bring to bear on all of the concerns that you guys have. I hope you feel like you walk away from this with a whole new perspective on how to communicate your value in procurement, and I hope that it starts to get you a little bit more traction with the folks inside and outside your organization. And with that, we'll let you guys go a little bit early before the hour, and we wish you all a fantastic day from here at SpendHQ. Thanks a lot.